Readers, today we're going to continue our read aloud. So far, we've investigated how characters reveal their traits over time in more complex stories. Characters can display several traits, some less likable than others. And sometimes our thinking changes as our knowledge of the character deepens or as the character evolves. Take a look at the post-its we've made when we first started this story and take a look at our theory charts. So these are some of the traits that we were thinking about when we first read the story. And here are the theory charts that we made as we went along and the evidence that we collected to support our thinking. I'm inviting you to consider another lens on character traits, that sometimes certain traits matter more than others because they influence what happens in the story. Let's try this out together. As we read on, let's investigate how some traits become particularly important to the story overall because they influence what happens in the rest of the story. So, if you were to theorize right now which of these traits you would predict would influence the rest of the story, which one would you choose? Think for a moment. Maybe jot it down in your notebook and maybe write a couple of words to explain your theory. Perhaps some of you think that him being determined is a trait that will help him. Maybe it's his ruthlessness that will be important to the story and more significant. Think about which ones you're considering and holding on to right now. All right, let's dive back into the story. I am going to share the storyboard that we were looking at previously, so you can take a look at that while I'm reading the story. Okay, here we go. I returned to the group every recess for 3 days. I stood, unnoticed, just outside the outer circle, waiting for my moment, for the one joke or wisecrack that would make me popular. I knew that I would only get one chance to prove myself, and that if I failed, I would be sent back to the stables. And so, with the single-mindedness of a scientist, I listened to the jokes the other boys made, hoping to align my comic sensibilities with theirs. Now and then, I found myself on the verge of saying something, but every time I opened my mouth to speak, Mitch would launch into another routine, and my moment passed, and I had to resign myself to yet another day in the dark. I did not know then that popularity has a lifespan, and that Mitch's time was about to run out. So, are you thinking what I'm thinking? I'm thinking about these text details, about going back to the stables and listening with the single-mindedness of a scientist and waiting for my moment that would make me popular and resigning himself to yet another day in the dark. These seem to particularly reinforce Will's cleverness and his determination. I want to think about these. And I'm thinking, as I consider that these are some traits that are coming up for me as I read this part of the story, I'm also thinking, so what happens? So we want to find out if one of the traits that we're investigating takes on extra importance because it influences the plot. If you begin to see that happening, or you see another trait that begins to become more important, quickly jot it down. Okay, let's read on and investigate if one of these traits influences what happens in the story. Will you keep this question in mind? How does one or more of these traits particularly influence what happens? It is a sad fact of life that the clothes a child wears and how he wears them often determine his rank in school society. I knew it, Sean's Owens knew it, everyone in school knew it. So maybe it was carelessness or temporary insanity or a subconscious desire to step back into the stress-free shadows of anonymity that caused Mitch Brockman to wear a yellow shirt with a yellow pair of pants. He might have gotten away with it if I hadn't left for school that same morning, unaware that one folded cuff of my jeans was noticeably lower than the other. As it was, the two of us were on a collision course that only one of us would survive. At recess on that fateful day, I took my customary place, a foot from the popular boys, wondering if I would ever get a chance to prove myself, and listened to Mitch tell another variation of his story about the Wienermobile. I pretended to enjoy this story as much as the others, while my mind strayed to a dream world where I did not have to feel so out of place. And Mitch and Sean and I were the best of friends. And then, with a suddenness that jarred me back to reality, Mitch Brockman, a boy who had never noticed me, never seemed to know or care that I was alive, turned to me, pointed at my uneven pants and said, "Someone needs a ruler." This was perhaps the wittiest remark he had ever made, and I froze. With 4 words, he had devastated all my aspirations, defined me as a fool, and all but condemned me to a life of shame and obscurity. I could see my future, my boyhood itself, crumbling to dust. And as I heard the laughter and felt the heat of the spotlight upon me, I pointed at Mitch's yellow pants and shirt and said, "Someone else needs a mirror. You look like a canary." Then, with the grace of a magician's assistant, I raised my left arm in a presentational gesture and said, "Boys, I give you Tweety Bird." Readers, you might be ready to do some jotting. I mean, wow. Will found his moment, and now he has openly mocked Mitch, comparing him to a cartoon character, Tweety Bird. Take a look at what I've jotted. Are any of these traits influencing what's happening? Maybe you want to revise your theory. I think I do. I'm not so sure that determination is a trait anymore as much as ruthlessness is. Because in this passage that we just read, we see Will who's mocking Mitch. So maybe you too are revising some of your theories. Maybe you're also sticking with one or more traits that you've listed as influential to what happens. Let's keep reading and let's continue to weigh and evaluate which traits matter more. I heard the laughter and felt the heat of the spotlight upon me. I pointed at Mitch's yellow pants and shirt and said, "Someone else needs a mirror. You look like a canary." Then, with the grace of a magician's assistant, I raised my left arm in a presentational gesture and said, "Boys, I give you Tweety Bird." And it was all over. As the volume of the laughter doubled, Mitch seemed to vanish, and that day, on that playground, Sean Owens's laughter was heard for the first time. In an instant, Mitch Brockman became Tweety Bird, and I, an absolute non-entity, became somebody, and then somebody special, someone to seek out, someone to follow. Sean Owens's first jester and best friend. The entire transformation was complete in a matter of months. Will finally got what he wanted, to be popular. Go ahead and do some jotting. I'm going to do some as well. So I'm thinking about Will's cleverness and thinking about some parts of the story that supports my thinking there, and it's Will mocks Mitch's clothes. And I'm changing my mind about determination and instead really thinking about Will's ruthlessness as Will replaces Mitch. And this whole transformation means that Will, he now gets to be popular. All right, so I'm sure you're just dying to finish the story. Let's do that now and add any jots that you need to develop your theory and to explain them. So be ready to do some of that work as you listen to the rest of the story. During this time, Mitch became a less and less vocal part of the group, telling fewer and fewer stories, until finally, the following year, he was gone. To another school, perhaps, or another state, or another country. I never knew. No one knew, because no one noticed. No one had called him for months. But my phone rang. My weekends were filled with sleepovers and baseball games and bowling parties and bicycle races and more new friends than I knew what to do with. And I did not trust one of them because I knew then that I was standing on sand and was only a yellow shirt and pair of pants away from the oak trees where the two Allens were still looking for four-leaf clovers. What an ending. I love how he brings it back to the Allens, still looking for clovers. Chilling. And I'm thinking about my theories. What about you? Did you jot ideas about how certain traits affect what happens and explain your theories, giving good reasons for evidence? Readers, I added a point to our anchor chart, summing up what we just worked on. Keep this in mind as you read and think about your own books. For your reading work today, you may be far enough along in your book that it can be interesting to think about which character traits seemed especially influential. Or you could continue our earlier work analyzing how characters are complicated or their less likable sides.